everybody, and welcome back to Balham Baptist Church online. I don't know about you, but I'm getting to the point now where I'm a little bit done with lockdown, to be honest, and I'm kind of waiting for life to go back to normal. But I heard some statistics this week that gave me a bit of hope. I read that 1 in 20 UK adults have started praying since lockdown, and similarly 1 in 20 UK adults, that is 5% of our population, have attended some kind of religious service online, having never gone to church before. Is it that people are turning to God in their search for hope? At our life group last night on Zoom, we were reading the story about Jesus in the wilderness and how he spends 40 days there. And at the end of these 40 days, the devil comes and says, "Since you are God's son, speak the word that will turn these stones into loaves of bread." But Jesus answered, "It takes more than bread to stay alive. It takes a steady stream of words from God's mouth." In our discussion, we realised that Jesus had the power to do anything, but he chose to rely solely on God and his relationship with him to sustain him, even when he felt done and hungry. May we continue to hope in God and let that sustain us. We're going to go to Arlene now, who has renovated her garage into a home office for our reading.
Good morning, everyone. This week's reading is taken from Psalm 24, verses 1 to 2 and verses 7 to 10. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. Lift up your heads, you gates. Be lifted up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, you gates. Lift them up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is he, this King of glory? The Lord Almighty. He is the King of glory. Thanks be to God.
This week I took my first funeral in lockdown. 10 people in the room, but most of the family having to watch the whole service on a webcast, prevented from being together to be able to say farewell to their loved one. I spoke to a friend of mine who's an organist who plays at a lot of these funerals, and he said he was averaging 10 funerals a day. Death has become a part of our everyday lives. We're faced with the reality of death on a daily basis. One family I spoke to this week said that they watch the BBC government update every day, and they either cheer or they sigh at the number of deaths that have happened since the previous day. What an awful thing to be having to think about on a daily basis. Friends are saying we're hearing about death all of the time, the possibility of it, and the invisible threat of it in our day-to-day existence. Death is hideous, it's frightening, it's cruel, and it's unusual. It's not the way that life was supposed to be. Death is our great enemy, and yet our generation is the most unprepared for it that there ever has been. Why is that? Well, one of the key reasons is modern medicine. In the past, death was a much more common part of everyday life. Women, mothers often died in childbirth. The children themselves often lost their lives in childbirth. Men and women in their workplaces were much less cared for and often died in those situations too. But medicine has relieved us of much of life's pain and taken away many of the causes of death. And today, many people, many of our loved ones, die in hospitals or in hospices, out of sight. We don't even see, or we don't even have to see, a corpse if we don't choose to. We avoid going to the doctors today out of fear of hearing news that might threaten our mortality. We're a generation that is obsessed with overcoming mortality and living forever. Fad diets, Botox fillers, gym bunnies, modern people are unprepared for the reality of death. The original temptation that mankind faced was to be godlike, to want to live forever. And in our generation, we're a generation that wants to live forever. Another reason we're not prepared is because we live in a secular society. We used to talk about Britain being a Christian country, but we live in an era where many don't even believe in the existence of God, and therefore we have no backstory. If you take God out of the picture, all you have is this material world that we live in. And if that's all you've got, well, you'll cling on to it for all it's worth. Thinking about death, Woody Allen said of death, he said, I'm not afraid of death, I just don't want to be there when it happens. Winston Churchill said, I am prepared to meet my maker. Whether my maker is prepared for the great ordeal of meeting me is another matter. Tim Keller, a Christian writer and speaker, he said this: rather than living in fear of death, we should see it as a spiritual smelling salts that will awaken us out of our false belief that we will live forever. When I think about the life of Jesus, when I think about the things that he experienced everything that you and I go through. In the life that he lived, the Bible says that he experienced all we do. Hebrews tells us, the book of Hebrews, chapter 4 and verse 15 says, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathise with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. Jesus knows what it is to feel temptation, he understands pressure, and he certainly understands pain. Jesus not only experienced the life we live, but he also experienced death. He experienced the awful rupture that death brings. Mark's Gospel, chapter 15 and verse 37 says, with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. And in those moments, Jesus experienced separation from this world, of this earth, and separation from his loved ones. But Jesus also experienced resurrection. In Romans it says, and it speaks of the Spirit's work in that point in his life. And if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies, because of his Spirit who lives in you. We're thinking at the moment about the work of the Spirit in our daily life, and the Spirit can breathe life into things that are dead. This quick snapshot of Jesus' life, that he experienced all he experienced, that he went through and experienced death, but also that he experienced his resurrection, tells us a lot about how we are to face our own death, and how we're to face the loss of a loved one. Jesus' resurrection means that we can face those deaths with real hope. The Bible teaches us that we are to grieve. Some Christians and some people, particularly if you're from British culture, take a kind of stiff upper lip approach to death. But when you look at Jesus and his own life, when he experiences the loss of a loved one, he certainly grieves. The best example is when Jesus experiences the loss of his friend Lazarus. Jesus didn't visit the family and say to his sisters, chin up, keep a stiff upper lip, be strong, don't show your emotions. No, the Bible says that when Jesus spoke to Mary, the text simply says Jesus wept. And then not long after that, in the same story, as Jesus is going towards the grave of Lazarus, the literal translation of what Jesus is going through is he was snorting with rage. That's how our enemy death can make us feel. Grief can often be a mixture of tears, unending tears, and anger at the loss of a loved one. Okay, I know exactly what you're thinking, and I've thought it all these years too. How can Jesus, if you know this story at all, because he's about to raise his friend to life, why is Jesus crying when he's about to go to the grave and bring his friend back? Wouldn't we all want that? I've never really understood it, and it was only looking at it this week that it came fresh to me once again. Why does Jesus appear to be upset? You'd think he'd be walking towards Lazarus' grave, smiling and thinking to himself, wait till you see what I'm going to do. How could Jesus be so upset and angry? He's upset because death is the great intruder. Death was not part of God's original design. We weren't meant to die. If you check out the beginning of the story in Genesis chapters 1 to 3, death was not part of the picture. And what Jesus was so upset at and what Jesus was so angry at was death itself. One family I heard of who was trying to bring comfort to their 7-year-old son after his 3-year-old cousin lost his life. His parents sat him down and said to him, you know that death is purely, perfectly natural. When you die, your body goes to the earth and helps other things to grow. Remember, you've watched The Lion King. But instead of bringing comfort to the little boy ran out of the room screaming, I don't want him to be fertilizer. So often we try and avoid the pain of death. And what the Bible teaches us is it's okay to grieve. It's okay to be angry at death, the great intruder. Death is not how life was intended to be. But Christianity and the Bible teaches us that we are to grieve with hope. Jesus' death and resurrection guarantees resurrection for all. We need that salt, the salt of hope, to go with our grief. Christians have an expectation of life after death, and the Bible teaches us that hope is personal, that our personality, our unique person, who we are, will continue on into the next life. The Bible also teaches us that our hope is material. I used to think that heaven was some pure white ethereal existence, but the Bible teaches us that heaven will be a city with culture and work and music and art and business. And it teaches us that the hope that we have is that the work we do in this life will continue into the next. The Spirit therefore can bring life into sometimes even our dead days of work. I love what N.T. Wright says about this when he says, what you do in the present, by painting, preaching, singing, sewing, praying, teaching, building hospitals, digging wells, campaigning for justice, writing poems, caring for the needy, loving your neighbour as yourself, will last into God's future. These activities are not simply ways of making the present a little less beastly, a little more bearable until the day when we leave it up behind altogether, but rather they are part of what we may call building for God's kingdom. We can have a hope because our lives will continue, and we have hope because that future existence is a material existence. Another hope that death's smelling salts awaken us to is to make sure that we do number our days and realise how precious they are. To live aware of the gift of life. I often use this illustration at funerals, but I think it makes the point well. If I were to tell you that in your bank account right now were £86,400 and that you had to spend it all today, I reckon most of us would have a pretty good go at that and try and get rid of the lot. Particularly if I told you that at the end of the day, or rather tomorrow, your bank account will have another £86,400 in it, and you have tomorrow to spend it. I can see you rubbing your hands at the thought of it right now. Listen to this. God gives us the gift every day of our lives of 86,400 seconds of our day. And we can choose to do with that time whatever we will. Death, in the face of it, can make us aware or bring us to life to the fact that each day we have while we're here with our loved ones is a gift, and we need to use it well. The psalmist says in Psalm 90 verse 12, teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. This life is not all we have. Death doesn't have to steal life from us, but rather the Spirit raises to life our daily purpose. And we can work in such a way that we even now are contributing to that eternal existence. There's an old Christian, he was a speaker, and he wrote many hymns, called Dwight Moody. When he was dying, he said this: "Pretty soon you're going to read in the Chicago papers that Dwight Moody is dead. Don't believe it. I will be more alive than I am right now." So can I encourage you, wherever you're at in your experience of God, whatever you're going through, and many friends of mine recently have lost loved ones, grieve with hope. Wake up and be at peace. Even laugh in the face of death and sing for joy at what's coming. If Jesus Christ has you by the hand, you can sing. Let me lead us in a prayer. I'm going to use a prayer that came at the end of a book that I would thoroughly recommend to you, that Tim Keller has written, just simply called Death. It's very small but has so much wisdom within it. And he shares this prayer. I share it with you. Our Father, you are the strength of your people. And we ask now that you would heal the broken-hearted among us and bind up their wounds. We ask that you would grant to them and to all else the vision of that life in which all tears are wiped away and all shadows have fled away. Raise us up in your Spirit's power now to follow you in hope and trust, and give us your loving power to protect us, your wise power to nurture us, your beauty to captivate us, your peace to fulfill us, and lift up our hearts in the light and love of your presence. And we ask in the name of the one who is the resurrection and the life, Jesus Christ. Amen.
His Well, Arlene, thanks so much for joining this conversation, sharing a little bit about your frontline at the moment. So why don't you kick off this and just tell us what is your normal frontline and what does that look like, and how has that changed in lockdown?
Okay, so my normal frontline, I work in a hospital as a paediatric coordinator. So I work with children that have hematological and endocrine disorders.
They're big words, yep.
And I work full time. I've been working in this role for nearly 2 years now. And my frontline involves liaising with consultants and parents and carers of the children, arranging clinics, putting together medical files, medical notes, having medical notes ready for the consultants, liaising on the telephone as well, and basically just making sure that everybody's informed about what's happening on a day-to-day basis, from the consultants through to the children, through to the carers, through to the parents.
Cool. So how does that change at all in lockdown? Because you're still going into work, right?
Yeah, I'm still going into work, so I work every single day, Monday to Friday, not the weekends. Since COVID and the lockdown, a lot has changed. It's become very, very quiet in terms of a lot of our patients now are being seen by telephone consultation or through Microsoft Teams, through virtual appointments. And where before they would have come in for various assessments and things, some of the children are very, very ill, so they can't actually sit amongst other people due to high risk of infection. So we do our assessments online with them. And then we do have the odd child that may come in, maybe 2 or 3 a week, and that's purely for things that can't be done on the telephone, so things like scans and blood tests and things like that. But I think with the COVID at the moment, a lot has changed in terms of less busy from a physical point of view, but more busy from a virtual point of view.
Got you. So in that setting then, kind of what kind of challenges have you found at the moment?
Challenges, it's been a bit difficult in terms of not being able to see parents face to face. Telephone consultations with them are fine, but sometimes you want that contact with them where you can actually have that conversation with them, like physically. And that can be sometimes a bit of a hindrance in terms of you can't always gauge body language or things like that through a telephone conversation. You might be able to assess by pitch of voice, but I think that personal contact can be a bit challenging when you want to actually explain something to them. And I think parents and carers maybe appreciate it more when you're speaking to them face to face rather than on the telephone.
Yeah.
So that can be a bit of a challenge in itself.
Yeah. Well, all those kind of soft visual cues and everything else, they're just not there anymore, right? Which is so important when you're trying to deal with somebody in a sensitive manner.
Absolutely.
Okay. So within this kind of situation now then, what have you found that helps you on a day-to-day basis?
I think one of the things that helps me is knowing that, I'm quite fortunate in that where I work, we do have a chapel, which I do go to quite regularly, first thing in the morning before I actually start my job. And that centers me for the day, gives me that peace to know that I can go ahead and deal with any situation. There have been, challenges where, unfortunately, we've had little ones that have passed away, and that can be quite hard, quite sad, because you've built up that relationship with that family, But I think going to the chapel as part of my day, saying my prayers and asking God for the peace, to give me that peace so that I can go ahead and do my job, knowing that He's with me and it will give me that confidence and that ability to do the job as well as I possibly can. That's quite comforting.
Fantastic. Okay then. And probably the final little question is, like, so you've said a little bit about chapel then. How are you connecting with God at the moment? Obviously the chapel's a big part of that at the moment.
Yeah, I think chapel is a big thing for me, because I leave work so early in the mornings. I'm literally running out. Thankfully I can drive to work, so I don't have to use public transport or anything like that. But I think knowing that I can actually go to a place where I can actually start my day with God, start my day knowing that I can speak to Him before I can do anything. And I think giving me that sense that through Him I can actually do my job, the best that I can. And I think He's put me where I need to be in terms of this role. And I think for me, that's just something that I really, really enjoy.
Fantastic. So finally, is there one thing that maybe we can be praying for you this week?
I think just to continue to provide me with that guidance, I think to continue to help people, to continue to help parents and carers with their families, just to be able to speak to people, give them that comfort, give them that knowledge, what they need to do, how they need to deal with whatever comes their way. I think it's just to give me that peace and that understanding to know that I can actually go out and do that.
Fantastic. Well, we'll certainly be praying for you this week. It's been really good to hear about your frontline, Arlene, and really great to get a perspective from someone who's going into work every day and dealing with the difference that brings and everything. And I'm sure some people will really resonated with the things that you've shared. Thanks so much for your time, Arlene.
Thank you very much, Jim.
as we go into this week, may you continue to put your hope in God and allow him to sustain you. Thanks so much for being with us this morning, and I hope you have a great week. Don't forget that we are meeting at 11:15 this morning on Zoom to spend some time together as a church family. See you then.